Even 4 years after Section 377 was decriminalized in India, giving the much needed legal approval and recognition to homosexuality, many from the LGBTQ community continue to face discrimination and prejudice. They are still made to feel left out. There is still lack of representation, as well as the support from the majority community is still missing. So the question is, how can companies become queer inclusive? And what is already being done to make our queer citizens comfortable and accepted? I'm Shelly Walia, Executive Editor at the Quint, and I'm joined today by an esteemed panel of guests to provide a perspective on the various issues the LGBTQI+ community face to achieve acceptance and how we as a society can make diversity our strength. So I welcome Kalyani Roy, MD at Accenture, Anjali Gopalan, Executive Director, Naz Foundation, Harish Iyer, Equal Rights Activist and Head DE&I Axis Bank, Sai Parlapalli, Support Center Lead at SAP Labs India, and Ritushree Panigrahi, India's first transgender woman stand-up comic and co-founder of the Outcast Collective, a DE&I consulting firm. So welcome everyone. My first question is to Kalyani. Where do Indian companies stand in their queer inclusion journey, especially in the last 4 years since the section was repealed?
I can't speak for corporate India in general, but I can speak for Accenture. And I think one of the advantages that we've had sort of starting off is that, we've been able to learn from our Global Pride program across the world, right? So we, in some ways, have had a lot of takeaways from that as we got started sort of post 2018. But if I have to call out sort of the three most impactful changes that we've driven, I think the first one is really empowering the Pride community within our organization. So for example, our employee resource group for Pride is only you can only be part of that employee resource group if you're a community member. And I think what that does is it creates sort of a safe haven for people to have conversations with like-minded people, get advice, inputs, but also to drive change within the organization. So a lot of the recent policy changes that we've been making is really based on the inputs that we're getting from this group. I think the second part of this is, giving people a platform to speak. And honestly, my personal belief earlier was as well that if you ask people to speak, they might be shy about actually coming and telling the story. The reality has been exactly the opposite. People are really want to be heard. They want to tell their story. And, for example, we run Hues of the Rainbow, which is, an opportunity for people who are part of the community to come and talk about their coming out story. And it really has created a huge amount of humanization, normalization of, the struggles, the reality of, the challenges that they faced. And I think that's had a huge impact within our organization as well, to start sort of making this more mainstream. And then the last part of it is that, a lot of our policies and, very simple things like dress code, right? A lot of this is very antiquated and dated. So I think a lot of effort's gone in at an organizational level to sort of upgrade that, to make it more neutral, make it more inclusive. And there are many examples of, some of these changes, including, I think, the harder parts of it, which is, changing insurance benefits to make sure that we have the same level of benefits for gay couples and bisexual couples as we do for, heteronormative couples. So I think these are our three sort of large buckets of changes over the last 4 years.
Oh, that's amazing. I want to ask the same question of Harish. Where do you think the Indian companies are? Kalyani spoke really, really well of how Accenture is taking that step. But if you would like to add anything to this.
I think I totally, Accenture has always been a beacon of hope for a lot of people in our community, in the LGBTQI+ community. I personally know of many people who have been working in Accenture. So thank you, Kalyani, for the inclusive environment that you give so many people. And I think that there is a lot of conversation, Shelly, about inclusion, which happens in the month of June. But then in the month of July and August and September, until the next June comes in, the moon of inclusion just goes away and it doesn't come back. till the next June. So I think intentionality becomes the most important aspect, and how you are doing things, and what is your commitment around the year, and how are you making incremental steps. Yes, the things that Kalyani just mentioned about dress code policy, about partner benefits, these should not be an option anymore. The time for advocacy has gone. It's the time for action now. Okay, it's 3 years past Section 377. So it's time for action right now. Now, people are aware, people are getting more aware. But now, how do you make it a business imperative? So in Access, what we have done is we are building a consortium of sorts of inclusive businesses where we are not only doing things within the bank, we're just making it about our employees. We are going out and telling our customers, you could be a same-sex partner and you can open a bank account with us. You could list each others as nominees for your fixed deposits. So that is the attempt that we are making, and I think that's the attempt that we all should be making right now, not just ourselves, also extending it outside and ensuring that you create an ecosystem of inclusive businesses.
Yeah, very well said. So, I mean, you did mention about Pride Month and how it becomes an opportunity for companies to come forward, but a lot of them just kind of do it to tick boxes, and also to it comes down to look like tokenism. And I wanted to ask Sai in particular, what can companies do to fight this ignorance? I mean, Harish has touched upon it a little bit, but how can we fight this ignorance and actually end up establishing a more supportive infrastructure for the community?
What you mentioned as tokenism, I think it's a good intentioned effort to actually start a diversity-based initiatives in the company. I think many of the companies don't really say, hey, let me just check off on these boxes. They are probably saying, I want to be more inclusive. And hence I will do these 7, 8, 9, 10 things, which others are doing and which others are not doing in some cases. But what I have noticed, and you're right, sometimes what happens is, I think we take a solution-oriented approach, which means that we believe we already have solutions to some of the problems. And then say, and sometimes these are the solutions. I'll do a Pride March, for example, or I will do a hiring drive, etc. And I don't think we are thinking through the problems properly. I think we are just saying, here are a bunch of things that can work, or they have worked in our case, for example, we can look at Western geographies and our offices in Western geographies and say, hey, it seems to work for them. Why don't we just take and do it here as well? And obviously, we are a different society and we are a different setup altogether. So what we've done consciously is we brought a bunch of these designers to some of our workshops and said, I think it appears we are checking off on all these boxes. How do we change this? So then we said, event-based activism, we need to move away from event-based activism to impact-based activism.
Yeah.
And that requires a different mindset altogether, right? Now we are saying, our MD, for example, when she's having a conversation with me, she's not talking about, are we doing this Pride Month? Are we doing this? What do you think about the maturity of inclusion dialogue that we are having right now? Do you really believe we are an inclusive company? Do the people from the community come to our office and feel authentic? Are they able to express themselves and be okay with it? And is the rest of the workforce as well? Are they being okay with it as well? Is the freedom such that it's being taken for granted? I mean, if I think the best form of freedom is one which we take for granted. I mean, I get up in the day, I don't even think about it, right? I'm just free to do a certain number of things.
What do you think can be done, and why do you think that we've not been able to, that there are so many members from the community who are not able to come out and stop leading these dual lives?
First, we have to understand that whole DE&I thing and inclusion of LGBTQ community people is not coming after the 377 judgment or NALSA judgment. So when we are asking, it's been 4 years, they are not getting inclusion, we should say it's been 1,000 years. Right. Then secondly, what is deterring them? Well, simple word, queerphobia. See, I was working in a legal firm. I was working as a lawyer. Then I joined a corporate, I came out to my family. I started doing my comedy as Ritushree, but I was too afraid to come out in my office because, I had a fear, and this is like 99% of the community has this fear of losing job. Because if you see, only 2% companies in India which are registered have this DE&I policy. And among those 2%, most of them are only treating DE&I as a policy, where it should be, DE&I should be the ethos of the company.
Yeah.
When you are treating it as a policy, you are just tick marking, same-sex benefit, this benefit, workplace infrastructure and all that. But when you are, so what will happen that employees will adhere to those rules. They will not say anything derogatory to, attract any action from HR, but they will make way to make the life of queer people hell in workplace. That is the biggest thing. Then if you see why they are not coming out, when I moved to Bombay, I was getting a 7-figure salary. I was heading a banking, company as a legal head. And believe me, more than 30, society and house owner, they refused to rent me a house because of my gender. So the question should be why. The question, rather than asking why they are afraid of coming out, the question should be that the allies, the larger part, those who are not within the rainbow, they should ask themselves that whether we have made the society so much safe for the queer people. Mm-hmm. And this will only happen when, coming out is a big event in our society. And I'm asking why. My father and mother never came out to me saying, hey, beta, we are heterosexual.
So I want to ask Kalyani that, like members of the community, they do feel unwelcome, they do feel unaccepted. And once they are into the workplace, they don't, though Ritushree very well explained, there is no need to come out, and the DE&I should be the ethos of the company. What do you think can the measures be from the side of the company, from their end, to ensure that the members from the community are not getting robbed of these opportunities right at the start?
As an organization, for us, it's been very important that we take a holistic approach. And that holistic approach for us, Shelly, has really started from the top, right? So the very first is, while we talk about training, about inclusive language, about, what does it really mean to be part of the community? What does transgender mean? What does trans woman mean versus, just having a level of understanding, and I will say true acceptance, right? At the leaders is what we've considered as very important. Venkat, who is one of our managing directors, he's part of the community. He was actually part of the Quint panel, I think last month. So he runs the ERG for Pride. And I think having leaders such as him as role models, right, and out, I think is a great starting point, right? Because people get to see that, hey, here is an organization where people are successful, leading full careers and, part of our community. And so, there's an, great opportunity. The second part of it is training sort of the larger team of people. And in this, I will say sort of, our size, which is our strength, is also our biggest failing, because we also need to sort of ramp that at scale as we get in new people to the organization, right? So there's a series of people, there's a set of people that are part of our organization for a long time, and they've been through sort of unconscious bias and sensitization trainings year after year. And, you starting to shift sort of some of that mental muscle memory. But as we get in new people, I think having that training right at the start. So just as people join and we do new joiners orientation, our topics of inclusion, of pride inclusion are part of that as well. And then I think the third part of training is really, some of the support and facility staff that we have. they come from a very different background, whether you look at the cafeteria people, transport people, etc. And so one thing that's helped us, for example, is that trainings that we do for them are specifically done in local languages. So in Bombay, we do it in Marathi, in Bangalore, we do it in Kannada. And so, it becomes a lot more natural and, easier for them to understand. We're not giving them sort of alien concepts that, they've not heard of and haven't grown up around, right? So I think it takes all of that to start making that mind shift so that people start feeling safe. I will tell you, a personal story. We had a US client visiting us and she sat through the DE&I session that we went through and, she was very quiet. She's normally a very vocal person. And I asked her, Shelly, later on saying, you were very quiet during the session. I was wondering, how you felt about it. And it turned out that her daughter was actually lesbian. And she said, I'm just impressed by the fact that, all of you in India who we think are sort of shy around pride are having these bold conversations. So I think, we have, in many cases, it's sort of an invisible audience that we are addressing, right, by these inclusive measures, because we don't know who is or isn't part of the community necessarily. But I think doing this consistently at every step of the way is what starts making people feel comfortable, to be out and open. And we've seen the change even in the last 3 years in doing these changes more consistently and at scale, right, through the organization.
Thank you so much for sharing that story. It really kind of gave me a warm, fuzzy feeling. I want to ask my next question to Anjali. I wanted to know the same question that I was asking about the industry. I want to know what you think that the educational institutions can do when it comes to creating an environment where members of the community can be better prepared for the workspace.
It's interesting because I remember presenting in front of a parliamentary committee once on the importance of including sex education into the school system. And I was told, oh, no. When you talk like this, you're going to get all our children to become extremely promiscuous. So I think the understanding and thinking around this has to change. And and this is what the Supreme Court said when they read down Section 377, is that we need to bring about a change in the way society looks at the community. And that can only happen if we start educating at every level. So, for example, the curriculum that teaches doctors needs to become more inclusive. The curriculum that is the teacher's curriculum needs to become more inclusive. So unless we do that, I don't think we're going to make much headway in our ability to change attitudes. The police curriculum, we have to include LGBTQI issues into it.
Ritushree, would you like to add anything to this? I saw you shaking your head and agreeing very much with what Anjali had to say.
We are preparing our kids to be queerphobic because they are not getting the education. When they are born, they are what they are seeing in their society, heterosexual male marrying a heterosexual female, giving birth to a heterosexual child. For them, that is so-called normal. So whenever they see something beyond that societal, set norm of binary, then their biases started triggering. So we need to tackle down from there because, see, if we will only talk about workplace, what will happen? We will make allies, we'll make better people in the four walls of the offices. But what after that? What after that? What are they doing when they are going home? Are they making transphobic joke, spreading queerphobia on internet or WhatsApp message on misogynistic thing?
Yeah, absolutely. The one word that both of you used was unlearn. So I want to ask both Kalyani and Harish to talk about some of the things, through new policies, and what are the things that the companies need to unlearn. And Kalyani, if you would like to, you talked about training at great length. If you want to shed some light on what were some of the things that you needed them to unlearn to be able to be sensitized in the way where we are looking for, a diverse environment.
Yeah, thanks, Shelly. And I'll probably take off a little bit from where she sort of ended the conversation. When we do the conversations with our leadership team, right, our managing directors, you're talking about 25 years. This is more than 40 years of unlearning that they have to do. And honestly, my generation essentially grew up with no parent ever saying any of the LGBTQ words ever mentioned, right? So that's sort of the social environment that this generation has grown up in. So a lot of conversations there is really very specifically around starting to change the mindset of the leaders and making leaders vocal, right? Because getting pride training from HR is very different from getting pride training from your managing director. There is one big shift of making a massive cleanup, which I think, we as an organization have done. I think a lot of organizations are investing in right now. But this is something that will have to continue over time as well, because, the norms will change. What we consider as, sort of our best North Star of inclusivity and pride today is going to be very different 20 years from now. So I think this engine of change that we've sort of fired up needs to continue to sort of work at that same level of efficacy in the coming years as well, if we need to sort of sustain this movement. The one thing I do look at with a lot of hope is as I look at a younger generation, just another personal story. My daughter was 7 and it was June and Pride month. And so all the Facebook pictures, as you can imagine, were a lot of photographs with Pride and everything. And I remember, I thought this was a great teaching point, moment. And I remember telling her that, they're celebrating and why are people on covers, and saying that it's because, some people have 2 mommies and 2 daddies, just like you have 1 mom and 1 dad. And she turned around and she said, oh, you mean gay and lesbian, right? So I think, I look forward at least to young India with a lot of hope to say that, they are a lot more, they're growing up much more inclusive. And so I think the rate of change that we're going to have to do in terms of the cultural shift for the younger folks is going to be lesser than we do for sort of the older leadership team, because they grew up in a different time.
Harish, would you like to add anything to this?
Let me share, we often speak about all our successes. Let me share about some of our failures and what we learned from those failures. So we came up with a same-sex partner policy where same-sex people can come and couples can come and open bank accounts with us. There was one such branch in the heartland of Bombay, a branch of Bombay where a lesbian couple walked in and they weren't given the treatment that we had promised them. I mean, the people didn't know about it, despite me personally going and training them and speaking to them. So I usually dress up in so-called female attire. So I went and I spoke to them. So I myself went as a demonstration and I spoke to them. Now, the conversation over there, despite all the training, was that they were curious and they didn't know how to react when they were really faced by something. Is that excusable? No. But what we did after that, after it flared up, became a social distancing, my CEO came into, convened a meeting, and the conversation was, he asked me, what do you plan to do? So I said, strengthen the training. Then he just smiled. And he said, yes, there is no going back.
I'm just going to ask my final question from each one of you. I'll start with Ritushree. How do you view or imagine queer inclusivity at workspaces going forward?
My ideal dream would be, I am out of job. Seriously, I work in diversity and equity and inclusion. If we achieve a perfect world, there will be no need of talking about inclusion of LGBTQ people, right?
Yeah.
And then I will be out of work. So yeah, I would love to see me and every DE&I professional out of job soon.
Okay, Anjali, what would you like your future to be and the future of inclusivity in corporate India?
You know what? I want to see, I'm committed. This is my dream, that we live in a world which is egalitarian, right? Which will not discriminate against human beings and animals both. We need to create an environment where we'll call out discrimination, where we will not allow hurtful language to be used. And let me tell you where it really matters to many. A recent study of the World Bank, it estimates that India faces a financial loss of 1.3% of its GDP on an annual basis due to the gay brain drain. All right. Now that is roughly $3 billion a year. So for those of you who are listening, that should mean something. Yeah. And that is why that we really need to, of course, besides this is the financial aspect. But I'm just saying, as a society, as a culture, we need to take stock, because right now where we are is not a good space. And this kind of discrimination and hurtfulness is not helping us as a society, as a culture.
Sai, would you like to answer the question, please?
Whenever I talk about what we do as part of this initiative, Pride at SAP initiative, to others, I invite them to, earlier I used to say, hey, these are the 7 things we are doing, 8 things we are doing, and I lose them in 30 seconds. They're probably fiddling with their phones. But then I invite them now to do a small thought experiment with me, where I say, hey, imagine a situation where you get up the next day in the morning and you are transported to this world. And in that world, it is 90% of the cases, men marry, I just simplify the whole thing down. Men marry men, women marry women, or they have the same sex partners. And sometime around their teenage or something, they actually have a change of sex as well. Now you are in that world. Imagine you're in that world, and the whole 90% of the world says, for you to have a partner of the opposite sex, or for you to have the same sex throughout your life, is considered abnormal, or it is considered illegal even in some cases. And then suddenly a bulb goes off in their heads. That's when they suddenly realized what they have been taking for granted, and the freedom that they have. Then they realize what they've been taking for granted. But I would like to see a world where, I've alluded to this earlier as well, you are free when you take your freedom for granted. You just know it's there.
There is a lot of intersection within the community also. There are queer people, there are queer Muslims, there are queer Dalit people, there are queer, and every time the queer people who also are people with disability. So the more intersections you add to every human being, the more challenging their life could be. So we as queer people also need to assume responsibility.
Such great thoughts. Kalyani, what is the world that you envision?
Yeah, I think just a reminder that June ends, but Pride doesn't. And so we need to continue to focus on, if I had to call my top 3, it's really bold leadership, empowering environment for the people of the community, and very comprehensive and consistent actions. And I think if we're able to do that as a collective, right, not just corporates, not just NGOs, not just schools, but all as a collective, that we will start to see the rate of change that we need. And my North Star would be where we don't have to make large incremental, shifts, but really the sort of smaller incremental changes, because there will continue to be sort of incremental changes that will happen as society and sort of norms change, right? So that would be sort of my takeaway.
Thank you so much for each one of you. It has been an absolute privilege. I mean, I'm so glad that I could do this. There was a lot to take away from this conversation, but I will end on this note of what Harish's boss told him. There is no going back. We should keep marching forward, and we should look forward to making diversity our strength, inclusivity our strength, and maybe build an egalitarian society someday. So thank you so much for each one of you for joining today. And that brings me to the end. Thank you.